A billionaire just paid $43 million for a rock. Not a diamond. Not gold. A literal rock with a signature on it. And while the internet called him an idiot, that same rock is now worth over $100 million. What you're about to discover isn't just why rich people buy things that seem completely useless, it's the invisible wealth system that's been operating right in front of you your entire life. And once you see it, you'll never look at money the same way again. It is what nobody tells you about wealth. The richest people on earth aren't playing the same financial game as everyone else. While you're calculating stock returns and obsessing over savings account interest rates, billionaires are quietly acquiring things that accountants can't even categorize. Classic cars that haven't moved in decades. Barrels of whiskey that will never be opened. Empty land that produces nothing. And here's the thing that should make you uncomfortable, these so-called useless assets have outperformed the stock market for the past 50 years. But why? What do the wealthy understand about value that the rest of us completely miss? That's exactly what we're going to uncover. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the assets you think are stupid might actually be genius. Let's start with what seems like the most ridiculous purchase of all, fine art. In 2017, someone paid $450 million for a painting called Salvator Mundi. Critics immediately attacked the buyer as a fool. The painting had questionable authenticity. It needed extensive restoration. Some experts said it wasn't even painted by Leonardo da Vinci. But here's your first revelation. The buyer wasn't buying art. They were buying something far more valuable, a tax-advantaged, infinitely portable, completely private store of wealth that no government can easily seize, track, or tax. You see, when you own a painting worth hundreds of millions, you don't report it on standard financial disclosures. You can move it across borders in a shipping crate. You can loan it to a museum and take massive tax deductions. And if you ever need cash, you can borrow against it without triggering a taxable event. The painting isn't the product. The financial engineering is the product. But let me stop here because I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't about rich people being evil or gaming the system. This is about recognizing that money itself operates on two completely different levels. There's the visible economy, the one you learned about in school, with paychecks and mortgages and 401k plans. And then there's the invisible economy, where wealth moves through objects, through time, through relationships that most people never even see. And here's where it gets strange. The invisible economy is actually far older than the visible one. For thousands of years, before paper money existed, wealthy families stored value in objects. Gold, sure. But also tapestries. Spices. Rare books. Weapons. The idea of keeping your wealth in a bank account is actually the weird, new experiment. Rich people aren't doing something unusual. They're redoing what powerful families have always done. The question is, why did the rest of us forget? Now let's talk about the most mocked rich person purchase of all time, land that produces absolutely nothing. In 2020, Bill Gates became the largest private farmland owner in America with over 270,000 acres. The internet exploded with conspiracy theories. But the financial reality is almost boring in its simplicity. Land is the only asset class that cannot be printed, diluted, or manufactured. When the Federal Reserve creates trillions of new dollars, every dollar you own becomes worth less. But every acre of land Gates owns stays exactly the same. In fact, it becomes worth more precisely because more dollars are chasing the same fixed supply. And here's what really matters. That land isn't sitting empty. It's generating agricultural income, collecting government subsidies, appreciating in value, and providing massive tax write-offs. Gates didn't buy dirt. He bought an inflation-proof cash flow machine that will still exist in 500 years. Meanwhile, the dollars you're saving? They lose roughly 3% of their purchasing power every single year. But even land isn't the strangest thing wealthy people accumulate. Let me introduce you to the world of collectible assets, a market worth over $400 billion that most financial advisors pretend doesn't exist. Vintage wines. Rare sneakers. First edition comic books. Classic cars. Pokémon cards. Yes, Pokémon cards. In 2021, a single first edition Charizard card sold for $420,000. And before you laugh, consider this. That card had appreciated at roughly 40% per year for over a decade. Find me a mutual fund that does that. The reason these assets work is something economists call the Veblen effect. Named after economist Thorstein Veblen, it describes goods that become more desirable as their price increases, the exact opposite of normal economic behavior. Rich people aren't buying expensive things despite the high price. The high price is literally part of what they're buying. Okay, but here's where everything I've just told you stops being interesting and starts being important. Because you might be thinking, sure, this is how billionaires play, but what does this have to do with me? And that's exactly the mental trap that keeps people stuck. The wealthy don't own these assets because they're rich. They got rich partly because they understood how to own the right assets. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you 3 principles that separate wealth-building assets from actual trash, principles you can apply whether you have $100 or $100 million. Because here's the secret that nobody talks about, the asset classes that rich people use. They're not actually close to you. You've just been taught that they are. The real barriers aren't financial. They're educational. And once you understand what makes an asset valuable in this invisible economy, you'll start seeing opportunities that you've been walking past your entire life. Principle number 1, true wealth assets solve the storage of value problem. It is what I mean. A dollar sitting in your bank account is slowly dying. Inflation is eating it alive. But a real wealth asset needs to hold value across time, ideally gaining value as money loses it. This is why rich people obsess over scarcity. A Rolex Daytona isn't valuable because it tells time better than a Casio. It's valuable because Rolex produces roughly 1 million watches per year while demand is 5 times higher. That scarcity is engineered, permanent, and increases over time as watches are lost, damaged, or locked away in collections. The same principle applies to vintage guitars, rare stamps, and original artwork. Ask yourself this about any purchase: will this item be harder to obtain in 20 years, or easier? If the answer is harder, you might be looking at a wealth asset. If the answer is easier, you're looking at consumption. This single question separates investors from consumers. Principle number 2, wealthy people buy assets that generate returns beyond appreciation. This is where most people completely miss the point. They think rich people buy expensive cars just to show off. But the $40 million vintage Ferrari isn't just sitting in a garage appreciating. It's being rented out for photo shoots at $10,000 per day. It's appearing in films for 6 figures. It's being displayed at museums, which qualifies as a charitable donation for tax purposes. The car generates income while simultaneously appreciating while simultaneously reducing tax liability. Triple deep. The same applies to art that gets loaned to galleries, land that gets traded on secondary markets, and real estate that generates rental income. Poor people buy things that cost money. Middle-class people buy things that hold value. Rich people buy things that make money while holding value while reducing taxes. That's 3 different games happening simultaneously, and most people don't even know the second and third games exist. Now here's where I need you to pay very close attention. Because principle number 3 is the one that separates the wealthy from everyone else, and it's going to sound counterintuitive. Principle 3, the best wealth assets are often illiquid on purpose. You've been taught that liquidity is good. Being able to sell something quickly means you can access cash whenever you need it. That's what every financial advisor tells you. But wealthy people understand something different. Liquidity is a feature for people who lack discipline. Illiquidity is a feature for people building generational wealth. When your money is locked in a painting, you can't panic sell during a market crash. When your wealth is stored in land, you can't blow it on a bad business idea. The friction is in the book. It's deliberately designed protection against your own worst impulses. This is why family offices, the private investment firms that manage billionaire wealth, often intentionally lock money into assets that can't be quickly sold. They're not limiting options. They're engineering patience. So now you understand the 3 principles. Scarcity that increases over time. Multiple return streams beyond appreciation. Strategic liquidity as discipline. But this raises the obvious question, what does this mean for someone who isn't already rich? It is where all of this comes together. You don't need millions to apply these principles. You need awareness. Start looking at every purchase through this lens. That vintage jacket at the thrift store? Check if it's a sought-after brand with limited production. That domain name you're considering? Gold that appreciate as the internet grows? That small piece of land outside a growing city? What if you just held it for 20 years? The wealthy aren't buying different things than you have access to. They're evaluating those things differently. They ask, does this store value, generate returns, and survive my own stupidity? When you start asking those same questions, you stop being a consumer and start being an investor. And that mental shift, that's worth more than any single asset you'll ever buy. And this brings us to the real answer behind everything. Why do rich people buy assets that seem useless? Because they understand something that took me years to figure out, and I'm about to give it to you in one sentence. The visible price of an asset is almost irrelevant. What matters is the invisible functions that asset performs. A $43 million rock isn't $43 million of rock. It's portable wealth, tax efficiency, inflation protection, status signaling, and legacy storage all compressed into one object. A vintage watch isn't jewelry. It's a savings account you can wear across any border. Empty land isn't dirt. It's a bet against infinite money printing. The moment you stop seeing objects and start seeing functions, you've cracked the code. You're now thinking like generational wealth thinks. Not about what things are, but about what things do. And that shift in perception? It's been the barrier between you and the wealthy this entire time. Not money. Not access. Used seeing what was always there. So where does this leave you? First, stop judging purchases by their visible surface. Every time you see a wealthy person buying something that seems stupid, ask yourself, what function might this serve that I'm not seeing? Second, start evaluating your own purchases through the 3 principles. Not everything needs to be an investment. But knowing the difference between consumption and wealth storage will change your financial trajectory over decades. Third, and this is crucial, remember that this knowledge itself is valuable precisely because most people don't have it. You now see an invisible system. That's an advantage. Say it. The wealthy didn't build their fortunes by following the same playbook everyone else uses. They found edges, exploited inefficiencies, and played longer games than anyone else was willing to play. You can do the same. It starts with seeing what others dismiss. It continues with patience most people don't have. And it compounds, quietly, invisibly, until one day people look at your useless purchases and wonder what you know that they don't. Now you know what billionaires see when they look at useless assets, and more importantly, you know how to see it too. If this changed how you think about money and value, hit subscribe because we're going deep on alternative wealth strategies that banks don't want you to understand. Drop a comment below. I want to know, what's one useless asset that you now realize might actually be genius? And if you want to take this further, the video appearing on screen right now breaks down exactly how ordinary people are building wealth outside the traditional system. Click it. Your future self will thank you.